We have heard a lot, and I hope you enjoyed that last session. Quite challenging stuff from Romany and from Billy. And I think it's really important in a meeting like this that we do hear that voice, because it sends us away with some real challenges about how you need to change. We're talking about 2050. Those are the people who you are thinking about. So do take that all on board, and particularly Transport for the South East, when you're putting your transport strategy together, have that voice in your ear, because, as Billy said, they will be watching you. Right, it's obviously really important with this whole transport strategy today that we hear the government's perspective. So let me, with no more ado, introduce George Freeman MP, who is the Minister for Transport, and he's going to set out the ministerial view about what's happening and how this is all going to go forward and how it really impacts transport for the future. So, George. Great.
Well, look, thank you. Thank you for staying, and thank you for everything you've been doing during the day. The next time I come here, I hope I'm going to be on one of my new 5,000-foot electric planes on a 30-minute hop from Westminster. It's just wonderful to be at this place, an iconic place in UK transport history, a great pioneering hub, and nowhere better for you to launch this strategy today. Unlike some ministers welcoming strategies, I've actually read it. Not this morning. Keith came to see me in London early in the week, and I've had a chance to read it. And I'm genuinely here because I want to support what you're doing. And the best way to support in this game is to actually come and be there. So I genuinely wanted to start by thanking you. Leadership isn't easy, and there's a lot of talk about leadership in politics at the moment. I think people want to see it being shown. And one of the themes of what I'm going to say to you in a minute is about the importance of place. I think people want to see more leadership of, for, by, and in the places in which the vast majority of people live their daily lives. Of course, that means ministers like me have got to set a framework and do some important stuff to help you in London, and I'm going to say something about that. But crucially, in this sector particularly, I think real leadership comes from giving the freedom and the incentives to allow place-based leaders to do what you do. And I'm also really impressed that when I arrived, I came, by the way, in a smart car, part of a pilot project with Ordnance Survey, doing some incredible work mapping the road as we drove. So on my journey, I was contributing to UK leadership in what I've christened transformatics. Remember that word, you're going to hear a lot more about it. That's the harnessing and appliance of mass data in transport for smarter solutions. One of the things I want the UK to be a leader in. And it's a very groundbreaking project between Ordnance Survey, a very smart tech company, and bus companies, looking at making sure that we use every journey to map an intelligent road to lay the foundation for autonomous and smart vehicles and the digital highway of tomorrow. I'm not sure yet how I'm getting back, but I'm looking forward. Probably not getting back is the answer. But also, I'll just say how impressive it was to arrive and meet 3 members of the Youth Parliament, because it is really important that this whole debate, this whole agenda, and what you're doing in your strategy is done in a way that it is clear is for the next generation. Because if we get this right, long-term transport planning and integrated strategic planning as you're doing, of course, it's fun if it's done well as you've done it, and it's important in the short and medium term. But where it really becomes important is longer term. And for me, and I think I suspect for you, let's make the test, do our grandchildren look back and say, the South East is an amazing place to live, work, and bring up a family and live one's life, because our forebears did something really inspiring. They thought out of the box, they thought long term, they thought ahead, they broke the silos, they came together, and they put place and people before the convenience of top-down provision. And that's why I really applaud what you're doing. It's really inspiring, and it was good to see young people here as part of that. Look, I'm going to say something about the new role that I have, mainly because I want to reassure you how importantly the new government, new Prime Minister, new Cabinet, big change in London this summer, takes this agenda. When the Prime Minister called me in, I thought he was going to give me a different job. And he also surprised me because he started talking to me about transport, about buses, trains, in a way that only someone who'd been a mayor or a councillor could do. And it struck me, this is the first time I'm 52, first time I've ever seen a Prime Minister with a passion for public transport, for infrastructure, for buses. I mean, the man makes models of buses. You know, this is my first tech company 25 years ago was to develop, we were trying to develop a little magnetic payment card system for buses. So I had an immersion in the complexities of payment on buses. But what really struck me is how passionate the PM is about this agenda. And so the brief was this: go to DFT, new Minister of State, senior minister. You're not the road, rail, shipping or aviation minister, a minister for the future of transport, to do what I did in my last ministerial portfolio between BAYS and health, drive across the silos and lead a forward-looking UK strategy for the future of transport. And I just want to share with you what is really at the heart of that. 2 inward-facing but important missions inside DFT and 3 public-facing. The internal are, firstly, DFT transformation. It's already started, but we know the organisation has got to go from being a sort of traditional Whitehall department for the administration and regulation and contract of 4 modes to a much more place-driven, innovation-backing, forward-looking department to catalyse UK leadership in the new models of mobility and the technology of transport. And 2, my role is explicitly a business role to attract inward investment to the UK, to drive exports, and to make us more of a world leader, as we have been in the past in transport technology. So one of the things I've commissioned is a baseline piece of work. How much do we actually attract into the UK in transport technology? Turns out we in government don't actually know the answer to that. We know it's quite a lot. We know it's not enough. So we're actually baselining it to work out exactly, and what do we spend? And last time I did this, we discovered we spent more than anyone had any idea, because it was in about 30 different schemes. So we're doing that work to pull together on the deep science what we're doing, and then we're going to set out a very clear strategy internationally so that the UK becomes a go-to place for investment. And I say that because leadership, as you're showing here, won't just be good for families, commuting, for clean air, for schools, for good planning. It's also good business. And if you get it right, regions like this will become, not least if you've got places like this, centres for the inward investment and the job creation in the future mobility economy of tomorrow. So those are the 2, if you like, internal roles that I appreciate are not going to electrify people down the dog and duck. The 3 public-facing roles I've christened the 3 Ds: tackling disconnection, decarbonisation, and digitalisation. And I'll just unpack those briefly for you. Disconnection is where the PM started. I've been writing for 10 years that if we don't tackle this growing, deepening divide between 2 Britons, my constituency, rural mid-Norfolk, in the Golden Triangle of Cambridge and East Anglia, one of the most prosperous bits of Europe, like this. But like your area, we have bits that are really left behind. And my patch, Cambridge might as well be 100 years away. Our educational skills levels aren't high enough, that's a big problem, but our transport connectivity is too poor. It's 2 worlds. And the PM's really passionate. His first speech was all about tackling that problem of disconnection. Faster solutions, whether it's smarter buses, new towns for train links, quicker solutions to connect people to the opportunities that our economy is creating, but we're not spreading enough. It's also disconnection between agencies. As a backbench MP, and I see some nods in the room already, you only have to be passionate about a place for long to start to see that too often the County Council, District Council, Highways England, Network Rail, train operating company, it's not my problem. And the place, which requires a joined-up solution, doesn't get properly looked after because everyone's doing their job in silos. And again, that's why this work is so important. Decarbonisation is really all about the broader environmental agenda. And personally, I think clean air is a more compelling entry point for most families, for most people in this country. If this agenda looks like an agenda of hitting remote foreign targets signed in smoke-filled rooms, it's less likely to cut through than if we explain to people this is about a clean life, a healthy life, dropping your children off at the school gate where they're not breathing in particulates, and building a modern transport system so that we can all be healthier, we can all be smarter, and we can work smarter and communicate smarter as we travel. And the third bit, digitalisation, I call really the oil of this new transport economy. I'll just highlight 3 things. Firstly, digitalisation of systems, of the rail network, of the road network. digitalisation in shipping, incredible stuff I saw recently at the London Maritime Week. But it's also, secondly, digitalisation of ticket and digitalisation of journey. If we can start to make it easier for people to use their phone to get an integrated experience, whether it's on the trains, they don't need to know how many train companies they're on. They just get one ticket, they get a fair price guarantee, and it works. Then the pressure for daft solutions like nationalisation will fall off. But if we don't tackle it, people will get increasingly irritated with lack of integration. But it's also integration on the road. I dream of the day when we can start to really reward people. If you've got a big gas guzzler and you drive to the school gate or to the city centre at peak hour, your phone ought to start to be able to drive an intelligent pricing system that says either A, you can't do it, or B, if you do, that's going to cost a lot of money. And if you're driving in a low-emission vehicle and you're going off-peak, or better, you're taking a hydrogen bus or a low-emission bus, you get green points. If we could start to provide a digital platform for place-based behavioural economics that really reward people taking the right decisions, both individuals but also councils. Imagine that. Imagine if councils actually got rewarded by the Treasury for building a green, smart economy, for reducing the costs of all the costs that the Treasury otherwise has to pick up that come from congestion, pollution, obesity. So place-based metrics are key, and digitalisation is key to that. And I was really cheered when I read your strategy that although you haven't necessarily set out a blueprint for 400 specific things you're going to do, you've laid the foundations for that smart approach. And I want to just say something about what I think we in partnership with you need to do over the next few years. If I can turn my pages. Now, firstly, I think we need to start asking some bigger questions about what the future of our workplace, future of work, future of patterns to work, commutes to work is going to be. So what are going to be the main sources of employment here in the South East in 30 years? I don't know, but I suspect you will know better than me. How are traditional patterns of work and travel going to change? We're already seeing more and more people are not doing the daily grind commute. People want to work from home. Digitalisation, meaning people can work more flexibly. What are the companies and the workplaces of tomorrow going to look like? And how is that going to change the way people want to get around and to communicate? What are social and economic trends showing? And I noticed that in my part of the world, in Norfolk, a lot of the planning is still very heavily dependent on the idea that every family will be a nuclear family with 1 or 2 cars that they own and they want to park outside their house. But I also observe that I've now got 9 godchildren, and they're all over 17, and they're all now beginning to move around. And only one of them wants to buy and own a vehicle in the way that it was all I wanted when I was 17. It's really changing. They're starting to use enterprise cars, zip cars. They're starting to use their phones. Mobility as a service is genuinely beginning to come for a new generation. And as they come through the system, they will change the patterns of demand for transport. So one of our challenges is not to design a transport system for us, for the lives that we've led. That's why I mentioned the young people at the beginning, but for the lives and aspirations of a new generation of people. Is mass car ownership going to be a thing of the past? And how do we avoid making sure that we don't create a 2-tier transport system where enlightened, modern, exciting systems are available in cities, but rural communities are condemned to old-fashioned, dirty and inconvenient travel? And that rural leadership is one of the things I wanted to applaud you for in your strategy. I am very aware that although in the news every night, newscasters glibly refer to London and the South East as if it is one place, what you've made very clear in this document is the South East is a separate place and it has its own challenges. And from Hastings at one end over to Heathrow in the other, it is an immensely important economic zone for this country, for our national economy, but it's also a place that, for most of the citizens who live here, is their place. And when you ask, where do you live? I say I come from East Anglia, which is 3 counties, Eastern region, 6 counties. People here associate with this part of the world. It's the bit between London and Europe, and it goes a long way across the country, and it's got some incredible landscapes, some incredible heritage, some incredible tourist and visitor sites, and some incredible businesses, and it has Gatwick sat right in the middle of it. And what you've done, I think, in this document is to begin to think boldly, what would a really long-term and inspiring transport vision look like? Look, we in government have to do our bit, and one of the things I did before coming here was to ask my officials as a new minister, well, what are we doing? Are we doing our bit? And I was pretty impressed. Let me just share with you what we think we're doing, and you can tell me whether afterwards in the Q&A we're not doing it. 7 billion for the South Thames Link network is an important piece of infrastructure. The 100 million for Gatwick Station to make it more accessible and more customer friendly. You will have seen the £220 million bus package. Buses have been very unglamorous for years in my part of the world, and I know that's true in some of the rural areas here. We've basically run them down to a subsidised skeleton service that only serves a few people. And one of the things in that bus package, we want to reinstate some lines, but we also want to be a bit smarter and ask, couldn't we use digitalisation to turn it around and do some passenger on demand service? Why don't we think more strategically about who today in this county region needs to be moved around by bus? Young people without transport trying to get jobs, or elderly people. And couldn't we have a connected system where community transport schemes, lift share schemes, and public transport, we could have a mixed economy and we make it easier to move more people more flexibly in the way that they want. On the strategic road network, we're working hard to ease congestion on the M4 and the 25 and 20. I was with Highways England yesterday, and a very impressive package of work around congestion easing using smart technology and digital. And closer to home, you will have seen the announcements on the A28 Relief Road at Birchington, Acle and Westgate-on-Sea, and the A33 in Southampton. Bread and butter stuff that your councillors and MPs and others have lobbied for, and in what is currently the biggest roads programme for several decades, we are actually trying to grip it. Now, some of the campaigners camped outside the Department of Transport yesterday are lobbying to say no more road investment. But the truth is, if we're really going to build a smart and modern economy, of course, we need to make it easier for people to work from home. We need to have better public transport. We need to clean up public transport. But we also do need to provide for the bread and butter basics of people being able to get around. And I hope that we have a strategic road network with more and more electric vehicles on it. And I think it's really important that we don't be knee-jerked into suddenly turning our backs and making daft decisions to go backwards. We have to build a properly integrated and mixed transport economy. You will have seen the 1.7 billion for the growth deal for the South East, and quite chunky money for some bypasses, the 25 million for Stubbington bypass to ease the delays around Fareham and Gosport. And you will have seen the 2.5 billion into improving the transport infrastructure for Portsmouth and Southampton. So quite big money coming in for some quite important local schemes. Nationally, we're trying to set a lead, and I'm now in my third month completing a big review of where we're investing in the R&D and the science and the technology of tomorrow, and asking the question, are we investing in the right technologies strategically in a way that drives inward investment and supports places like yours to do new leadership? We've already committed 190 million into developing smart ticketing and intelligent transport systems and data science. I worry that sometimes we launch projects, little initiatives, which are brilliant if you're lucky enough to be in them, and then when the money runs out, it becomes a memory for the people who are part of it. And we've got to somehow make sure we start to gather all the data and go to the next phase of going to scale. We've put £250 million into connected and automated vehicle research. I was recently at Oxbotica in Oxfordshire, and as I say, I've just come this morning in a car that is pioneering road mapping. If we get this right, this country has the potential, given our data science, our advanced transport infrastructure, and our expertise in running transport systems, to be able to be a world leader in that informatics of how we do both digital highway and autonomous vehicles. And we're putting 1.5 billion into our low-emission vehicle sector. And yesterday I had the first meeting with Nadeem Zahawi at the Department of Business. He and I jointly co-chair the Office for Low-Emission Vehicles, which is now being looked at internationally as a model for how governments should start to drive leadership in this space. We're also about to, and I'll shortly be setting out, our major regulatory review, which follows on from launching last year our Future of Mobility strategy. We recognise that the range of vehicles, from pods to all sorts of small, large, medium, electrified, automated, passenger and goods vehicles. There's going to be a revolution of stuff that's coming onto our roads, and we need to be ready for it. And I want to make sure that in our regulatory review, we're not simply proposing that nothing is adopted until it's proven to be 100% useful and effective for everybody. We don't just walk somebody with a red flag in front of it and then wait 20 years and pass a bill. I want to try and look at our future mobility zones and see, couldn't we build a more intelligent network where in 10 or 15 places around the country, rural, suburban and urban, we create the test beds for this future mobility revolution, measure, collect the data, plug into a national informatics institute and use that for a smarter model of regulation. So that instead of waiting and getting it late, the UK becomes a first adopter, a place where if you're developing a new pod or a new delivery system, you'd come here, test it, regulate it, and then we lead in setting the standards. And I say all this partly to help inspire you to think about, for your strategy locally, by leaning in on all of this stuff, you will be able to attract inward investment and also improve the standard of living of your communities. You will have seen that we've put together the Connected Places Catapult, linking cities and transport. I'm shortly going to go and visit them to make sure that we've got the best of both worlds, not what often happens in mergers, which is that stuff gets lost in the merger. I don't think that's what's happening, but I want to make sure that it's working to create that drive and leadership around connected places, the clue's in the name, and both in a way that helps you as place leaders, but also helps the big investors internationally who come here to back our blue sky science. I just close by making this point about what you're trying to do here in the Southeast and the contract between us, which is how I see us. I think we really do have to ask, and I'm beginning to do it in the department, and wanted to welcome you doing it here, some really big questions about the next 20 or 30 years. How are we going to increase people's mobility? People are not going to want to move less. They're probably going to want to move more, but not all at the same time, and in lots of different ways. How are we going to increase people's mobility whilst reducing our dependence on the internal combustion engine and traditional methods of energy? How are we going to make all our towns and cities clean air zones? There's not much point having 10 clean cities if 80% of our children at school drop-off are breathing in particulates. How are we going to actually really drive down emissions in the areas that are most urgent? How are we going to unlock the local leadership to make it easy to embrace this incredible revolution of smart traffic management systems, smart parking, smart road pricing, all of which is made possible by digital? But it seems to me, until now, we haven't really created a framework where community leaders, councils, and their local businesses can start to use it to build competitive offers in place. And I want you to think a bit about how the Southeast might be able to do that. What's the future of air travel? I mean, I started here at Farnborough with a joke about arriving in an electric plane. One of the things I'm looking at is whether we couldn't build a UK leadership in small, low, short-haul, low-passenger electric planes. We are the first country in the world to have an electric plane scheduled service, which I will shortly be going to ride on. It connects with one of the islands off the north coast of Scotland. I'm going on a ship and coming back on the plane. But should we be thinking about long-term a sort of 5,000, 10,000 feet low-altitude electric plane sector? It's a bold thought. But if we're really going to build, particularly in the southeast, with high densities, a connected economy, with people needing to get across from city to city more quickly, we need to think about whether we couldn't actually ease pressure on the roads, ease pressure and drive leadership in the battery technology that will be fundamental to that quiet revolution of small, low electric plane travel. How are we going to get freight off heavy diesel lorries? Yes, onto trains. How are we going to have lorries in the future? What are trucks of tomorrow going to be powered by? And one of the things I'm looking at is hydrogen, and whether we couldn't do something in the UK to really lead on the new fuels for heavy systems. These are all the big challenges we face. I close by saying just this. My commitment to the PM and to you in London as the new Minister for the Future of Transport is to create what I call the lit runway, the lit roadway, so that from deep science across to places that are empowered, to enlightened regulation, to digitalisation, and to making sure we're harnessing that so that people come with us on this journey rather than view it as something that enlightened and enthusiastic ministers and bossy and interfering politicians and councillors do to make their lives harder. We make this something that our citizens look at and say, I'm really proud to be in the South East. I'm so pleased to be in an area that's leading in this because I can now do my daily travel, spend more time with my children or talking to my friends or on my phone or doing whatever it is I want to do, and less time driving an internal combustion engine, pumping out dirty air and driving rather less well than I think I do. And the more we can show people that this is a smart, clean, green revolution that will make their lives better, then I think we're on the cusp of something incredibly exciting. I'm committed to trying to put that roadway in place for you in London. But crucially, I think, the big change is we've got to create the incentives that places can really lead. And I think too often in the last 4 or 5 decades, governments launched initiatives, launched a scheme, tipped some money into a little silo, and required local leaders to run around with a bucket trying to pick it up. I think we need to be much more strategic and respond to places that show leadership. So I close by saying this: thank you for all the leadership you are showing. In order to jump to the front of queues to get funding, I would suggest that the more you can put forward a business plan, a business case that says, government, we're prepared to build the new communities of tomorrow, as I know, and I've spoken to people here about some of the incredibly exciting schemes. We're prepared to meet that housing need. We'll help reduce carbon dependency. We'll build smart homes. You saw the announcement from Robert Jenrick last week. We'll do smart connected transport. Will you give us the freedom to do it the way we know best? And I think that's the beginning of a new deal between London and places. We both have our part to play, but this document shows that you are really thinking seriously about it, and I commend and thank you for it. And I look forward to doing everything I can to help in the years ahead.
You've got time for some questions?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think you've got time for a few questions. I'm just going to kick off just while everyone's there. Just one quick point. We talked earlier with Rupert about the, I suppose, the move to actually make the Transport for the South East a statutory body. You talked about uncertainty in government. What's the programme for that? You know, when can we expect this to be a statutory body?
Well, there's two bits to that. I know that statutory ambition is partly linked to funding. And let me give you this pledge. We're going to continue to do the funding regardless of that. This is really important. We know that these leadership forums need support. And I think the answer on statutory is really as and when the scale of your ambitions make it necessary and essential that that's what we do. I'm in charge of devolution in DFT, and one of the things I'm actively looking at doing is creating devolved partnerships, development corporations, for corridors, clusters, counties, so that we're not just reliant on Highways England and Network Rail to put whatever it is we need on their control period or on their future RIS. We need to make it easier for places to come together and do stuff. Mm-hmm. Now, the right structure might be a development corporation. It might be an organisation that's capable of raising an infrastructure bond. So the answer is we're up for looking at the right structure, but it needs to meet the ambition. I wouldn't start with the statutory powers. I'd start with the vision and what it is that we need to be able to do.
You're not necessarily trying to replicate what you've done in Transport for the North, for instance?
No, I think it needs to be... I mean, the North has a very particular problem, which is a combination of decades of underinvestment in their infrastructure. They've also got a collection of very big cities that can tend to compete if they're not brought together properly. There's some quite complex politics up there. So what's right for the North isn't necessarily what's right for the South East. But my commitment to you is this: put forward a compelling plan for what you want to do, as you've started to do in this document, and we're open to making sure you get the right structures.
Question.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I was delighted to hear where you're placing emphasis, particularly on digitalisation. And I have two requests. The first is that for future strategies for transport to really be implemented, we need for that for the application of those technologies, we need connectivity. And therefore my first ask is, could you please go to DCMS and say that 56% of A and B roads having 4G coverage is not enough. And that figure has not changed for 12 months. So just in terms of coverage, DCMS currently is, and Ofcom in particular, clearly, are monitoring the operators on the basis of residential coverage. But very few of us drive around. And very quickly, the second one, you're going to the catapult. Please, for innovation, many innovators need access to data. And at the moment, the catapults are unable to provide open data for that innovation. Thank you.
Thank you. They're two brilliant points. I've taken the statistic. You won't be surprised to know from what I've said that a major part of the work I'm doing at the moment is looking at how we can unlock data in silos, make it more available to the people who need it to innovate, and build local and national proprietary expertise in the informatics of transport.
Question at the back. Chat with the mic, far away.
Okay, Eddie Hewitt from Slough Borough Council. First of all, referring to your comments about the Prime Minister's passion for buses, I'd also remind you that he likes writing numbers on buses, and it's got us in a great deal of mess now. And it's turned out to be a massive lie, which we're trying to unravel at the moment. But my main point is on the environment, and you may have seen Ed Ball's TV programme on exporting and importing. If we actually go through with Brexit, and you're supporting or propping up a government promoting Brexit, if we actually go through with that, it's going to result in a lot more air freight from America, Australia, Korea, wherever. And it's actually going to shatter part of our environmental, sustainable vision that we're trying to put through with our TFSE strategy. So I wonder how you can actually justify that.
Well, look, another day in the pub, we can have a conversation about the dreaded B word of British politics. But on the no deal implications, let me just say this. I was very concerned in the spring, and I voted against no deal in March because I didn't think we were ready. I didn't think politically ready, economically ready, and I didn't think it was something that should be landed at very short notice on an economy, country, and communities that weren't ready for it. One of the things that's happened in the DfT since the new government was formed is it has, this summer, become very heavily a planning, forward-leaning department. I think it's done a brilliant job, by the way. I haven't been involved in it. I'm not blowing my trumpet on Thomas Cook. It's the biggest peacetime repatriation in history. It's been an incredible operation, and I think it shows that the DfT is capable of running a big logistical operation at speed, quietly, and the same amount of planning is going in on no-deal preparations. Now, you confidently assert that it will be worst case. And it could be. But let me just tell you what we're doing to prepare. And it may not be worst case. I mean, a lot depends on goodwill and depends on whether the instruction or the decision of particularly French and other customs authorities is to make life very difficult. Now, if they decide to make life very difficult, one of the points I would make is that, you know, it's not a question of British exports are in trucks with Union Jacks on them and French exports are in trucks with the French flag. They're just trucks. And you start pulling them over saying, this is a British truck. It turns out it's got medicines for French hospitals from AstraZeneca in Macclesfield. It's not as straightforward as people think. But nonetheless, we're working on the basis of worst case, and we've done three big things. One, and I wholly accept that it should have been done before, but it has now been done this summer. Major investment in a framework agreement so that priority goods, food, medicines, and a number of other things that you'll be aware of, we've put in place provision. So if there's any problem, we've got alternative supply routes to get them into the country. Secondly, the major operation around the southeast here to make sure that if there's trouble out of Dover, then we are well prepared to make sure that it's contained and handled as well as it possibly can be. And thirdly, a massive public information campaign to get people ready. Now, be in no doubt, I am absolutely committed to getting a deal. The compromise I've made is that I think it may well be that we have to go through a serious no-deal threat and possible moment to get that deal. Now, you're perfectly able to disagree, and I can see you probably do. But my point is, in the end, a government has got to try and deal with this very difficult logjam, which is undermining the uncertainty around what we're doing is beginning to have a very, very damaging effect. Now, I've made my decision. I think we need to get on with it. I think we need to plan, mitigate the damage, and do it as well as we possibly can. And my own view is I don't take the Y2K line that this will be nothing at all. But I'm confident we're going to get a sensible deal. And it may not be within the next week or two. You're shaking your head, I understand. But if we don't, I think the electorate will punish us. But someone's got to show some leadership and have a go. We can't just sit on the egg and never incubate it, because I think it'll end up rotting under us and destroying all trust.
Question down here.
Good afternoon, Minister. My name's Dave Axum. I'm chair of the Enterprise M3 Local Economic Partnership. Thank you very much for coming today, and I am so delighted that your position has been created by this government, because it needs the focus on the future. We've been talking about that all today. I shall give you an example of inward investment in transport, which is the building which is being constructed just over there, which is the EMEA service hub for Gulfstream aircraft, and is bringing employment and apprenticeships into this area. Behind it is the Airbus Zephyr facility, working on advanced composite materials for new aircraft. We need the focus on aerospace. It's the one thing when we talk about it, everyone talks about it as the problem that can't be solved. When I was young, this was called the Royal Aircraft Establishment, and it's where research for the whole world went on in aircraft. Yeah. We can do the same again. How can we turn that into action around aerospace research?
Thank you. Well, it's a beautifully made point. I will shortly, with the Secretary of State, be setting out our DFT decarbonisation strategy. And you will be pleased to know that, yes, it will look at each of the modes and what they can do. We're also going to look at places and how we can help places, so we have an X and a Y axis approach. On the aerospace research, I think you're dead right. There is a revolution in air travel which is happening, and the campaigners yesterday will not countenance the idea that the air industry can be anything other than the evil polluter. I just beg to differ. I think the aerospace industry has shown an unbelievable ability to innovate on noise, on fuel, and if we give them the right signals, then I think they could easily deliver very much more quickly than anyone realises. Now, I appreciate that there's a difference between short-haul flights, which could be electric, and the longer-haul flights, but we are looking now, and one of the things I'm looking to do on our R&D budget is to see whether we couldn't invest more strategically in the future power for tomorrow's jets, and whether it's a combination of whether it's hydrogen or whether it's biofuels or whatever it may be. But there are little things we could do right now, like stop jets taxiing with aviation fuel from the gate to takeoff point. There's little things make a big difference. So one of the things I'm looking at is, couldn't we start as part of our decarbonisation strategy to pick the low-hanging fruit and accelerate us on that path and get everyone realising this is also good business?
Quick question there. I think, are you okay with time? Yeah. One more question? Yeah.
Right, thank you. Roy Perry, Chairman, South East England Councils and former leader, Hampshire County Council. We've heard a lot today about the need to make more use of public transport. We've also heard from young people that they think it's crap and they can't afford it. Yep. We would like, in the South East, we've got more old people than any other region in the country. Old people like me get free bus use. Do you not think it's an idea to give local councils the freedom to ask their elderly people, would they be prepared to pay 50p or £1 each time they use a bus? If they were to do that in a county like Hampshire, that would give us £3 or £4 million a year that we could give youth bus passes, so the young people get travel, that we would also be able to ensure that there were buses running when old people want to use the buses, rather than having a free pass but no bus. Will you give us that freedom? Yeah,
brilliant point, Roy. Yes, is the answer. I mean, bus regulation, you don't need me to tell you, is an absolute jungle, legal and legislative jungle. But the answer must be yes. We have got to create a framework in which particularly rural public transport, isn't what it's become, which is a very skeletal service, subsidised by councils for often empty or partially filled buses to run on what were traditional routes, sort of the best we can do. That can't be the best we can do. And digitalisation, one technology, allows us to map at any one time, where are the people today in Hampshire who want to get around? And imagine a world where you can tap in the night before and say, I'd like to go to Portsmouth tomorrow. And the system could overnight work out and ping you and say, well, we've overnight we've organised, there's going to be community buses here, lift share here, mainstream buses here. I mean, we ought to be able to build an intelligent, demand-led system, as well as having core and well-funded bus services on the main routes. This shouldn't be beyond the wit of man. And I'd be the first to acknowledge that anyone who's been in local government, has delivered huge amounts of efficiencies. We've had very substantial reductions in spending, and we don't see very substantial reductions in services. And in that situation, it is quite difficult to do really bold innovation. That's part of what the Prime Minister set out. That era has ended, and we've now got to create the freedoms and the funding for local people to really innovate.
It sounds like you're moving closer as a government towards backing road pricing as well.
Well, we've already, if you look at some of what's going on in some of the inner cities, I mean, it's road pricing by another name. The congestion charging begins to charge if you're on certain roads in the middle of London. And I think the public, as long as it's fair, as long as they know, as long as we make it possible for them to plan in their journey, and it's not some stealth tax that you weren't aware of and you get home and 2 weeks later find a bill. I think as long as we make it part of a sort of smart city mapper, Waze, digital journey planning system in which we help people, I mean, I'd like to go further and reward people who decide I'm going to park the car, take a park and ride, win some carbon points. I'm going to get a low emission vehicle, win carbon points. In the end, I think we ought to be able to have a system where we value in the public accounts things like clean air, healthy children, and we put a cost on things like congestion and pollution. And then we start to reward people and places who reduce those public ills. That, to me, is the inspiring opportunity of this moment. And that's why I returned to government, because I think if we get that right, then to your point earlier, sir, about the misery of the Brexit logjam, we might even inspire people who didn't vote for it to say, well, it was pretty ghastly, but actually what came out of it was a real energy in reforming the way we run our domestic economy, and we've got some really bold reforms. And that, I think this is one of the areas that the public are beginning to get most fed up and are most hungry for some real change.
Minister, thank you very much indeed. We're bang out of time, but thanks very much for giving us so much time this afternoon. Round of applause to George Freeman. Safe journey home. Safe journey home on your, I think we've got an electric scooter ready to whisk you back off there, so go easy on the electric scooter.